Guess what, theology nerds? Oh, I know what you're thinking. You said I clicked play on the Homebrewed Christianity podcast. Is it true? Is this episode labeled correctly? Is this just Catherine Keller? It is. JC herself, just Catherine Keller, is in the podcast house. She's going to be occupying your earbuds, going to be talking today about some political theology, talking about Christology. Intercarnations is the name of one of her most recent books that if for some reason you don't have it, then your theological bookshelf feels lonely. Anyway, I love Catherine Keller. I love getting to talk to Catherine Keller. I'm so excited that on this birthday week, we had Jack Caputo and Just Catherine, two JCs in 1 week. That is awesome, because here at Homebrewed Christianity, we proselytize not for one, but multiple JCs. The OG, Jesus Christ, John Cobb, Jack Caputo, Just Catherine Keller. So, I'm just saying, 2 in a week. I can't believe I'm being this good to myself when I listen to my own podcast. I hope you enjoy it. This is the last few bits of time for you to score some Homebrewed Christianity Theology Beer Camp tickets. At midnight tonight, the birthday pricing disappears. That's right. Then the early bird price is up. And you know what early bird prices are for. People that don't want the full bird. The full bird price, that's when it goes up. But you want to get it right now. Lock that ticket in. Get one of the 99 seats available for Theology Beer Camp this summer, August 16th, 17th, 18th in Asheville, North Carolina. We're going to be tasting the goodness of the Southeast craft beer capital. We're going to be having some theological fun. Travis McMacken is going to be there. Robin Henderson Espinoza is going to be in the house. We're going to be resurrecting prophetic Christianity. That's our theme. That's what we're going to be doing at Theology Beer Camp, along with lots of other fun and exciting stuff. I'm going to announce soon the other podcasts that are going to be in the house and some of the other theologians that are headed the way of Beer Camp. But for now, right now, just go to theologybeercamp.com and get your ticket. All right? And as we enter the theology zone, Catherine Keller talking about Intercarnations, her most recent book, and some other stuff that's headed your way soon, because she had just turned in a new book on political theology right before we talked. So that ends up coming up. But if you want to get some Catherine Keller texts, books, and you want to pay for them, then enter the West Star giveaway we're doing right now. Right now, our friends at West Star, that's right, the people behind the Jesus Seminar and the current God Seminar, are giving away 3 different sets of over $500 worth of books, which includes Catherine Keller books. You're about to listen to her. Jack Caputo books. He was just on. John Dominic Crossan. He was on just a week ago. Marcus Borg. It's such a... You just don't want to miss out. Get some books on Jesus. Get some books on God. They're packed full of nerdiness, and you can win them for free. And the cool thing is, when you enter the giveaway, if you tell other people about the giveaway, your chances don't go down, they go up, because every one of them that enters, you get 3 additional entries. So it's like a universe geared towards altruism, you know? But it's statistically organized on the back end, so it actually works. Huh? Yeah. But then your friends are going to say, Tripp, did they just tell me because they wanted more entries, or because they really thought I could benefit from reading these books? And I'll say, I don't know. But you will enjoy the books if you're a nerd. And who knows? Maybe you'll find some of them you want. And you give the person that told you about it the books for Christmas or their birthday. Let's say you were my friend, and I can't win books in my own giveaway we're doing. So, like, if I wanted some, I would have to get a friend to win, and then they could gift it to me. Yeah. And maybe your friend is telling you so that you can get their birthday gift settled in advance. I don't know. That's just an idea. It's just an idea. That's all. It's just an idea. All right. Catherine Keller on the podcast. And by the way, Catherine Keller teaches at Drew Theological Seminary. So if you are like, how do I get to hang out with Catherine? Then you want to check out the Div School of Drew, because, Catherine teaches it. And my dad did his DMin there. So it's like in the family and then in the process family. So that's like two good reasons. That's what I think. All right. Here it goes. Oh, yeah. And don't forget, Raleigh-Durham Chapel Hill in April, the live podcast. Howard Wass, Will Amon, and our friends at Emmaus Way. You should come. Do it. Hello, Homebrewed Christianity listeners. This is Tripp, and no, it is not the eschatological banquet, but it is JC herself, just Catherine Keller, is back on the podcast. How are you doing, Catherine?
I'm feeling very happy and cozy to be here on this podcast. There's a gorgeous blizzard outside my apartment right now, so it's a very ferocious March lion that has come in, but this is an interior that's warm, and I'm glad to be in conversation with you and your folk.
So you recently published Intercarnations, Exercises in Theological Possibility, and it is pulled together a number of different kind of strings of your thought and wove them together in some christological reflections that I was just, there's sometimes you read theology books and you're like, ooh, I like this, or oh, what about that? And then there are other times, the first time you read it, you're just taking it in because you trust the author up front. Mm-hmm. And I thought the introduction to the book was simultaneously insightful and hilarious. Like for a theology nerd, hilarious. Like some of the ways you played on words that signaled whole host of Christological controversies and such, that I just read it enjoying it the whole time. And that rarely happens to a theology book, but it could have been because you were the first book I chose to read after I defended my dissertation. So that might have been why. I don't know.
Well, bravo, Tripp. And I'm honored to come so soon after that great event. But yes, I could see how you'd be kind of glowing and floating for a while, and anything you'd read would be just full of loveliness for you.
So I'm interested in hearing when this book, or when the different conversations in your previous work, when did they start to get connected around the concept of intercarnation and the new possibilities for theology today?
Mm-hmm. Well, in a kind of spiral, those essays are collected from a period that goes back in a couple of cases to the beginning of the millennium. Mm-hmm. And most of them are much more recent, but 3 or 4 of them I wanted in there that were over a decade old, just because there's some themes that I haven't been focusing on so much recently, but that I thought would be of interest, especially around gender and feminism. But it's only as I was pulling the essays together after I finished Cloud of the Impossible, which was a rather dense monograph. So, the pulling together of a collection of essays was pleasurable work. And it was in looking for the interrelations between the essays so I could choose them that I think the notion of intercarnation really began to take on body, and then took over the body of this book. So there's no single essay on it, is there? It just features in the introduction and then in the afterword.
Well, but one of the things I found about the way you kind of hooked them together going in and out of the text is the doctrine that normally is debated to draw boundaries, and where we most insist upon sameness and pure repetition as a church is the very doctrine where you start tying together, making connections, opening things up, and folding different things together that normally would not get connected in Christology at all. And you do it by playfully talking about Christ Inc. and the Christ Incorporated and the way Christology has been short-circuited from its intercarnational possibilities early on. Can you kind of open up the christological problem as you see it?
Well, you've opened it up as I see it, so thank you. But the idea of Christ Inc. Is a bit of a satire, of course, on not just the corporate capitalist proclivities of so much of U.S. Christendom, but also there's a way in which the very notion of corporation is its own mockery of embodiment of the corpus, the incorpore that is the incarnation. So the idea was to liberate the very trope of incarnation to be something a little closer to what that old homeless itinerant Jew, I think you refer to him as, might actually recognize. Probably not. Intercarnation would be as weird to him as the incarnation would be. But nonetheless, in the imagination of such a conversation in the clouds sometime, I was hoping just to break open the notion of incarnation into a more biblical, more socially just and relational kind of ontology. Right now, the incarnation, as it really hardened into the very core of Christian orthodoxy, is all couched in substance metaphysics. And I think a lot of your listeners know just what that is referring to, but in metaphysics where God is a substantial entity, a unified one that is as a substance, an essence that is self-identical and perfectly bounded. And every material thing in the world is likewise a self-identical, bounded thing. Relations between substances are all external. It's like the opposite of a universe that might conceivably have been called forth by love itself. Mm-hmm. That would not be a cosmos full of creatures that are simply external to each other, like cookie-cut entities. So the whole idea of substance metaphysics is at play. And very understandably, substance metaphysics had been crucial to the spread of theology in the 3rd, 4th centuries and onward because the followers of Jesus, Jewish and not Jewish, needed to communicate with pagan elites and audiences. So I don't fault them for taking in Platonic metaphysics, but what's tragic is that then that metaphysics seemed to harden in a new way around this notion of the divine substance coming and embedding itself in a human physical substance and sort of being clamped together. They couldn't really ever mix. So it's this odd dualistic thing of the incarnation, but then separate from every other thing. So clearly intercarnation is a way of saying, but that's not what flesh is. That's not what bodies are. The body you are and the body I am, even at the strange distance mediated through virtual energies, are not external to each other. We're participating in each other through at least 2 vivid senses right now. And really, the touch is involved too, that we are in sensory and pre-sensory ways endlessly entangled in our worlds. That's just what it is to be a body. And so to get the body of the embodiment of the divine in human form seems important to get that body right. And that means to get it back from a substance metaphysics into a relational metaphysics, and some of your listeners are sophisticated already with process thought and the kind of alternative metaphysics of interconnectedness that in all of our becomings that comes through. So the becoming human of God is not some supreme exception to the creaturely condition of interrelatedness. Rather, it would be the supreme exemplification of our interrelatedness. So that's what intercarnation is thinking about as its background theory.
In one of the things you do for Christ, what Whitehead wanted to do with God, right? Like where God isn't the exception to all of our metaphysical rules or whatever, but the exemplification of them. And you want to do the same for the very kind of the prophetic heart of the Christian tradition. And one of the contrasts you draw, I don't remember where it is at this point, but was you do a play on the notion of the Eucharist, where often the very body of Christ gets turned into this absolute exception as opposed to the hyper gift. And I think that, some people could inherently resist that poetic twist, but it's not done as a way of dismissing God's presence in the person of Jesus, but by amplifying it. And
absolutely, it's a way of amplifying it through our whole endless network of relations that make up the creation. It's a way of amplifying. It is not a way of diminishing. I've been working a lot on the question of exceptionalism, divine, Christological, but also U.S. exceptionalism, Anglo-Saxon and white exceptionalism, human exceptionalism, I call it anthropic exceptionalism, as I've been working on my book that I finished yesterday on political theology. So this attempt to counter a politics of exceptionalism seems very important to me right now in a country being bullied by a leader who always makes himself the exception, who doesn't play by the rules. So it's especially vivid to me right now that to get back an understanding of the divine and therefore of the one who so distinctively and in a very important sense uniquely embodied that divinity, to get back the sense of what that embodiment means. And to make clear, saying it's not an exception, but an exemplar, certainly joining a medieval theological tradition of Christ the exemplar that got knocked out by the preference of the church for the Anselmian sense of the single exceptional atoning sacrifice. So another way, but we could have gone the way of Christ as the supreme exemplar. And in process theology, yes, that would make sense if God also is the supreme exemplification of the principles of reality, the principles especially of relationality and of becoming. Mm-hmm. I don't want to get too abstract here, so you can pull me back at any point. But the point being, first of all, never when we coming out of a process model, perhaps, are criticizing exceptionalism, to think that the alternative then is just, it's just normal. He's just normal, or he's just average, or he's just, schmo like the rest of us. That's not the point. Relationality does not diminish difference. It enriches it. It fills it with content. And as you said, it amplifies it. It is the field of energies, that relationality through which the unique event of a particular moment can be conveyed. And some moments are much more distinctive than others.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not ever diminishing the distinctness, the uniqueness of what happened in the life of Jesus of Nazareth and our relationship to the one he called Abba. It's utterly distinctive But the point of his being then named Son of God is made very clear in the gospel that has the highest Christology. John. It's very quickly in the Gospel of John that it's made clear that he's here so that we all may become sons and daughters of God. And he even says things like, so you do greater than than I will. And he wasn't about himself being the exception. He was about this radical relationality, the kind of relationality that happens when you really mind your relations, when you make yourself conscious of them and carry them. And that's then the intensity that we call, sometimes when we can risk it, love.
Yeah, and in the text you kind of highlight around the Gospel of John is where Jesus quotes the Psalms and says, I said you are gods. And then everyone around starts to get upset, going like, hey, we already thought you were a little nuts when you were running around saying I and the Father are one. But now, if you're going to start redistributing divinity around and expect us to have to take this compliment, like the resistance in that text and the resistance to this type to a relational or an enhancing and amplifying understanding of the person of Jesus in the life of those who wear his name around. I think some of that resistance is a theological resistance to the implied ethical responsibility that's demanded when you realize that the gift of God for us is a call of responsibility upon us.
That's absolutely it, Tripp. Right. There might be anxiety about that coded theopoiesis, the becoming divine, that actually became very orthodox for several centuries. But
like with a capital O, like
theopoiesis. It was right. Athanasius was teaching that God became human so that humans could become God. Right. So even that radical aspect of Jesus' message was heard for a while. But I think you're pointing to what's the very core of it, that if this incarnation is distributed among us like the body itself in communion, yes, that calls us to respond. That calls us to take responsibility. It makes us able to respond. And why is that so scary? Well, because we'd rather just go about our business and be glad that we're saved and we'll go to heaven when we die. And in the meantime, let Daddy take care of everything important. I mean, I think there's that weird passivity in relation to the big things of life that Christianity hasn't been able ever to quite release itself from, not for long enough. It releases itself over and over. Luther was releasing it. And so quickly, salvation by grace alone turned into another excuse to make lots of money and just, take our salvation then for granted. And again, leave the big things of the world to God. With all of that assumption that goes with it of a controlling omnipotence. And Jesus was cracking up that assumption before it had really even gelled. Clearly the book of Job is already worrying about the ethics of the notion of a controlling omnipotence. But on the whole, that hadn't concretized in a way it ultimately did in Christian doctrine. And process theology has been an important instrument of God in deconstructing that omnipotence and therefore calling us all to the potentiality that is ours to realize, not just in ourselves for our own lovely, creative, meaningful lives, but of course in the networks within networks that make up our society, our world, our planet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One of the things I remember one time John Cobb said in response to someone who's very disturbed by he gave one of the intro to process lectures at Claremont. So every year they give an intro lecture, and
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the first year students that did not know what seminary they signed up for get shocked and are saying, if what you're saying is true, then all of a sudden we get responsible for everything God's doing. And he said, well, you misunderstood what I was saying. God's not going to make you do anything, but you get the opportunity to respond with just a smidgen of the love God gives to you in each moment. And if you do it today, tomorrow more will be available to you, but it's only because God was giving it to you today. If that sounds like works righteousness, then you really should read the scriptures more.
Right. Yeah, right. And read a little Wesley of him.
Well, I'm pretty sure John reads them both. They're in both sides of the ears.
He reads Wesley beautifully. Yeah, right. The unfolding process of sanctification builds on justification. No, John has a very rich sense of divine grace being constantly offered no matter what, and therefore in the most forgiving sense. But it doesn't mean God's doing our work for us.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're here for.
In one of the questions that I wonder, and some people asked about having you draw sharper distinctions between what you mean by theopoetics and kind of classical theology, but I wonder if Christology is not one of those doctrines that theology, the logos of theology, actually undid the multiplicity that if John's logos Christology is offering. Right? Like if the logos Christology of John is one of this redistribution of materiality and wordiness, then why is it that Christian theology treats this doctrine like the battle for the one true interpretation, and how does a theopoetics that wrestles with the same questions reframe the Christological quest of sorts?
Yeah, important cluster of questions. It seems to me that when Christology redistributes its logos, it is, as John so well points out in his Christology, it is actually a very high Christology that comes into play, and process theology has that high Christology of the cosmic logos that is the logos of John, that word that without which nothing is, that word that is in all things, calling all things forth in the creation, but moment by moment. And at the same time, that logos shows itself in this way we claim as distinctive in Christianity to be an utterly on the ground, indeed earthy, dirty, grounded Christology at the same time. So it's a very high and a very low Christology spiraling together all the time. And it's so low, it's lower than that itinerant homeless rabbi and his band. It's as low as each little quantum electron, each grain of sand is its micro embodiment with its own bit of indeterminacy, its own spontaneity of that cosmic logos. And so when we're embodying it to the degree that we do, there's a huge, dangerous, creative range of options in play for us, which is, I think, then why the church got so nervous about keeping its own public unified around its orthodoxy. First, it was nervous, just in order to cooperate with Constantine and the empire, who wanted a unified religion. But then church by church, there's this anxious attempt to keep unity. And that can gradually kill the sense of connectivity. It can make it more about uniformity than about difference in relation. So we're really just trying to find our way back and forward to this high-low logos Christology, it seems to me, and this is a way of saying I feel deep resonance with much of Christian orthodoxy in those moments of its cosmological logos, and for that very reason, practice deep resistances to the modes of exceptionalist uniformity that it's gotten into all along the way. Patriarchal forms of uniformity, heterosexist forms of uniformity in the United States, a strange racist weight uniformity given Christian blessing on the right. Yeah, but it's about getting back, isn't it, to the the love practice. And that love practice is always going to be pretty much the opposite of antagonistic competition. Mm-hmm. So a unified orthodoxy and its exceptionalist Christology might make for a stronger way, stronger weaponry for competing against other religions, but that competition is a betrayal of that which we're supposedly in the world to share.
In one of the chapters in the book, you describe the history and development of theopoetics, and another chapter you talk about the transformations in the kind of from the death of God to theology after the death of God to post-secular reflections around the sacred and such. How would you introduce the shifts that have happened in the 21st century in theology that have kind of set the table for theologians approaching language differently? I think one of the challenges is for contemporary theologians, and especially those that are trying to translate the conversations they have in the academy and such to the congregation, is the rarely do you have a sermon about what language means when you use language to talk about whatever is connected to the word God. And so the confessional expressions of the church have a silent account of language that plenty of people continue to resist for good reasons. Mm-hmm. And I'm interested in like how you give a shorthand description or invitation to the transformations in just theological language that you draw out in a couple genealogies in the book.
Mm-hmm. Kind of depends, doesn't it, who one is speaking to, as to then how one uses language and how one uses language about language. But I think you're making a really important point that there's a kind of denormalization of language itself that might be crucial to the work of ministry. Mm-hmm. And so if that's where you're wanting to get me here, thinking about how this teaching can go on in a congregation when we have all of our multiple layers of evolution and revolution in theological language that have continued from the last century on into this, around the genders of language, around what various forms of oppressive presuppositions our language might be carrying, but also simply about the problem of language freezing, concretizing, it's hardening, as we were speaking about the hardening of the word itself. The mm-hmm. word hardens, and so this is where I think the postmodern comes in with its connection to folk like Derrida, who you're not going to probably preach about from most pulpits, but who have helped to to open up an incredible vitality in language by always questioning its substantiality, always teasing open multiple meanings. But to get to that in a congregation, I think the language about language that works is to talk about parable, and then with cross in here, Jesus the parabler, and to talk about metaphor. Just that basic distinction of the metaphoric from the literal is so crucial, even though it's poo-pooed in the academy and modern post-structuralists, because it's so taken for granted, and other language gets used. We do metonyms, not metaphors, figurations, not symbolisms. But look, I go there over and over just to help folk realize that language about anything important is already much more than literal. Mm-hmm. It's got concreteness. It's embodying something, but it's not a dead body, which is what the literal comes to mean. It's not language that cookie cuts out its reality. Like reality is just a bland kind of dough, and we use our words to cut things out with sharp borders, or even worse, that reality is just that bunch of already, solid, separate things, and our language is just reflecting it and naming it. No, I think at this point, people who are coming to church actually are addicted to something much richer than that. Even if they think they're biblical literalists, they love the Bible and its language, its ancient language, and there's almost nothing literal there. It's almost all story, metaphor, and parable for the really important teachings. They love that. They love to sing. It's all songs with lyric verse. So I think this is the way I always work to get people just into a more enlivened place with language, and then it automatically begins to become a more relational, more perspectival language. And then gradually you can help them understand that relationality isn't the same as relativism. It's saying that there are so many things going on right here among us in our community with different perspectives going on isn't to say anything goes. Mm-hmm. I think On the Mystery does some of this work in a way that works kind of well with some churches, but that's how I work at it, that breaking up into parable.
How do we make theopoetics an invitation we give to the non-specialist? Because I think that is, we have taught real poorly how to do theology in the church. Even mainline Protestants will have sophisticated theology happen with their church leaders and their academics, and then they make a statement and put a Bible verse at the end of it, like we proof text. And we've had this very kind of over-rational and kind of superstitious understanding of biblical authority we let operate in the background of our conversations. And I think that theopoetics is less it's so much not a destination that's prescriptive of people. It's descriptive of an enactment around language and stories and parables and things that open up new ways of living and new ways of faithfulness and new imaginations of possibilities that, I almost think part of a process-relational ecclesiology is rethinking the liturgy and structure of our time together, so that we don't try to use words differently in a whole format that assumes a logos that we're wanting to resist.
I think that you're right, that there's often I guess it's a kind of condescension at work as one moves from the academy into the actual congregation, and that is not creating a great contagious energy. Certainly in mainline Christianity, that's not happening. So, theopoetics is a strategy. Again, I don't know that term would play very well in most churches, except in your little reading group where you get people who are willing to really reflect at a deeper level. But then when that's happening, and certainly with pastors that should go on, it is enlivening. I mean, it's helpful to remind them that theopoiesis is an ancient and orthodox notion. It's not just that mid-20th century idea that I was shocked to find out had been invented at Drew 20 years before I got there. I thought I coined the term theopoetics. I really did. And then I learned that it was Stanley Hopper and Amos Wilder at Harvard gives him credit. So, but those guys at Drew were really just interested in the poetics. I got interested in the ancient meaning, which is a mystical meaning. And I think it's both tricky. It's what we were talking about before, but perhaps very, very inviting as well, because the ancient meaning that was there for the church fathers and Orthodox for a long time is of theopoiesis, of God becoming or God making. So it's really getting made God or ourselves doing God. It is a form of becoming divine, taking the incarnation really seriously as intercarnation. That is, that we are to enflesh God. And in that sense, we participate in the divinity. There is a certain becoming divine, though it's no doubt an infinite process, and it doesn't happen just in an individual. So I like that mystical background for theopoiesis, theopoetics. But that, I think, takes some careful teaching because, for the reasons you were saying, that scares people. It sounds heretical, even though it's the most orthodox with the big O. And it sounds like an awful lot of responsibility. But I think people are drawn to the playfulness of theopoetics, but also, and this is what's most important, it's respect for multiple perspectives. Mm-hmm. That it teaches that we are always interpreting, and then you get to realize theology is always interpreting older traditions of theology. It's interpreting sacred texts that are themselves interpreting prior editions of the sacred text, stories within stories of interpretations of interpretations of interpretations, and that we are now involved in that lively interpretive process. So I guess theopoetics can be a more literary and playful way of just getting to hermeneutics, mm-hmm. which is we have to always go there over and over and over again in all of our teaching, just helping people to take responsibility for the interpretive process, not just of themselves as individuals, but themselves as members of bodies within bodies within bodies, in which their interpretation matters. It materializes.
Well, that's actually a theme that comes up multiple times in the book, is the way recognized and unrecognized interpretations, especially ones with the stamp of the mono one on it, impose themselves on bodies. And one of the things you do in the book, two different areas around both race and in gender, is the way the particularities of Jesus are stripped away, and that is like, as he no longer becomes a first century Jewish man and this type of thing, you end up with a Christology that's more and more pale. And so I wonder how do you see the power of interpretations revealed in a communal context? Have you thought about like how you introduce or uncover the interpretive power dynamic that's always at play when for so long I think the church has resisted wanting to acknowledge interpretations, because we're all cynical enough to know that where there are interpretation, there's another, and there's also brokenness, and that insecurity of the church has worked very hard at covering over just how much interpretation's present up and down the body.
Right. It's very difficult to cross that line, from a community of interpreters that understand themselves to be always in a process of responsible interpretation. They are to be held accountable for it, into a community where someone else supposedly does our interpreting for us. And that's again close to that kind of idolatrous sense of the logos just come down one time in a way that requires no interpretation. It's idolatrous because then, in fact, it's such a very pale Christology. Mm-hmm. It becomes quite empty, and so all kinds of projections of power are being done with it. And that's, I think, becoming more and more clear with the Christian right having been able now to hook up with a leader who's almost completely void of Christ, or even any attempt to use Christian imagery, and in fact was not even a member of a church. It's very interesting. That's fine with me that he wasn't a member of a church, but it's not so fine that so much of the Christian right is so comfortable with flagrant contradictions to what they expect morally from each other. And so, right, I think what's going on is a kind of secularization of right-wing Christianity. Mm-hmm. It's always been happening quietly, but now it's like the secularization is happening within the religion itself in some way. It seems like there's a non-credibility of the faith, and so it's possible now just get your theology from Fox News. And as one pastor was recently quoted as saying, an evangelical pastor, he gets his congregation for an hour a week. Fox News gets them, for about an average of 10 hours, if not more, a week. And that seems to be a faith just about, you're with us or you're against us. That's about what it comes down to. So the friends of Fox are what you believe in. And that means you hate the others, the they. So it's a very, very empty and dangerous antagonism that now we have a political theology of the right wing working through. And I think it has to do with this failure to take responsibility for interpretation. Eventually, it all just becomes incredible, even to the fundamentalists. And so you get aggressive political passions that take the place of Christian convictions, passions about the right to own a submachine gun when you're 18, that kind of passion, the passion about the evil of immigrants and the danger of an increasingly colored public, etc. Those passions, it seems to me, are increasingly filling up the void in the faith of the right. But on the left, there's also been a lot of void. So we've, in a different way, failed to adequately enliven the interpretive process. I think in a congregation, Tripp, you just get in there with interesting Bible stories, and you work, you play at those interpretations. And I have a great pastor here up the street at my United Methodist Church, and Kay Carpin, and he's passionate social justice leader, but he's also hilarious. So somehow into the last sermon, we were learning about about the proper way to locate toilet paper so that it rolls down rather than being pulled up. And this all became actually a quite hilarious parable for those who are for us or against us. But I won't try to reproduce his sermon. But he keeps his congregation laughing and mobilized, and then a lot of great work can go on in terms of hermeneutics.
So, how has the public shock or this ugly public reemergence of racism in America had you reflect on the essays around race in the book? Because in one sense, it's not like, racism went away or anything, but it got so publicly affirmed and permitted that, like, even me and my friends from the South who know racism is plenty alive and well were shocked. Mm-hmm. And so, like, how does that kind of public retrieval, impact the way you think through the questions of race as you developed it?
Well, this book was off to press before there was any concept on my part and those people I knew that we could have the sort of president we now have, and that sort of release of the racist demons. But as you say, it's not new. I mean, we now have a very toxic symptom in office, but it's a symptom of a condition that we've never healed. This condition of our Anglo-Saxon exceptionalism, as it then morphed into to white supremacism. Kelly Brown Douglas's book "Standing Your Ground" is just great on tracking that history very concisely, and I've used her work and then my political theology of the earth that I've just finished, and it works a little bit more consistently, I think, with the race question than I did in those essays. But it's been popping up for me in a long time, in many ways, for a long time, because it's such a deep part of just the history of my family from the South, and they did have slaves, and then there was a strange resentment that I have to watch out for in myself about the fall from that aristocracy and that privilege. So in my own family, I'm very conscious of the way sometimes the racism could pop up, and it could unify us together. Only at really bad times in my family's history, really suffering times. But then, that sort of enmity against blackness was a real unifier. And that's what I think working on political theology, at least in the conversation I've been in with it, tunes you to, what's serving as the unifier to create a kind of homogenous, uniform public of we against they. And there's nothing stronger than race in the United States for creating a kind of white unity among a vast public. I wouldn't say it works that way necessarily for the majority. I think for the majority, it's more hidden and masked, and there's a little bit of shame that comes with it. But now we have the explosion of a population of 30 or 40% at least who are shameless now in new expressions of racism. But this has advantages. The veil is off, as one article by Mishran on the day of the inauguration last year put it. I use this in my book. There's some interesting potential in the veil being off of our racism and our sexism, and with that, the heterosexism, and our Islamophobia and our anti-immigrant intensities as well, right? The veil being off has at least the potential, if we work with it in a good apocalyptic way, to be transforming. By apocalypsis, I mean the literal meaning of apocalypse. I am a literal apocalyptician in this way. The word literally means unveiling. That's what revealing comes from. Apocalypse, removing of the veil. And that doesn't mean now the world ends. It does expose a lot of catastrophe that has come and is to come. But it also reveals some truths about ourselves as a collective in a way that does seem to have the potential, I think we are seeing it, for a much more vigorous mobilization. And Christians need to play a crucial role in this. I mean, I keep thinking we should have a kind of gospel march or prophetic march or Bible march. We don't want it to be exclusivist in its Christianity, but a way to really mobilize the witness of Christianity against the present doctrine, which seems to be make America hate again. And I'd like to see us roll down Pennsylvania Avenue with Deuteronomy 10 on a big banner. You must love the foreigner because you were foreigners in Egypt, etc. So it's a time of new mobilizations happening that can keep happening as we come to terms with this unveiling that is not just about how bad the right wing is. Mm-hmm. It's about us, U.S. us. And race is the black and the white of it.
And there's also, like, out of the Me Too movement, there's also been an unveiling of all sorts of violence that have existed under places of power.
Really unveiling, yes, right. A lot is being rendered quite naked.
And it's one of the questions that the members in the homebrewed community sent was asking how your understanding of power could help frame those in places of responsibility that have to facilitate these conversations around race or gender, and these type of conversations that you're having if you're in charge of a business or a church, or even thinking about it as a parent, which how you use these conversations to describe a new expectations around power and affirmation and moving away from this. I guess the biggest shock to me that happened was not so much the reality of it, but just how passive other people of privilege have been at saying anything or pointing it out. Yeah. Like the whoever's riding shotgun, there's a whole lot more of them than anticipated. Yeah.
Oh, it's really tricky. I mean, to get at the power question is all about, of course, what I hope to be meditating on with intercarnation, and just with the process deconstruction of omnipotence. We idealize a dominant controlling power, then that's whose image we are in. It's a very pale male image, and that's what we emulate. And then those who don't have the option of succeeding in the pale male power imago seem to get especially pacified, passive, rendered helpless, and just hoping, for, again, a kind of omnipotent intervention, which isn't going to come. What does come is the summoning up of our collective spirit. And how do we tune into that? Well, I'm hoping intercarnations is one metaphor for one, set of conversations, but just digging open the is a metaphor of the incarnation, that God is in flesh, in the flesh of the world, in the flesh of a definitely not white guy way back then, ought to help us tune our people to the preciousness of the bodies of the vulnerable of our world, and that means, special attention to populations who were singled out for oppression, clearly. And African Americans among us have had that special distinction. Now, I think part of the quiet that one gets from decent folk, and often even from highly educated folk or academics on race, might have to do with how, we sort of got burnt out on the identity politics of the 80s, the 90s. I think there was a kind of exhaustion. It's like, my gender issue versus your sexual issue versus your race issue versus your class issue. And, my issue is the one that explains everything else, right? And it's the exceptional issue. It's the exceptionalism of the left. And race could certainly function that way. I know that for me, for a while, I think my feminism functioned that way. I outgrew it pretty fast, and that's why I was attracted to process theology, where everything is always much more complex. Always the intersectionality of issues is what counts, and that's a concept that came out of African American women's work, intersectionality. And I think that that intersectionality is a way of naming the relationalism that really is redemptive and can mobilize us in new ways right now. What we do not need is to resort to any single issue, including race. We can be primarily committed to a single issue. That's a good idea. Mm-hmm. Get focused, but always keep that mindfulness of the interlinkages. So the interlinkages between Black Lives Matter and Me Too become crucial, as they always have been in the lives of African American women. And keeping in mind the importance of class is crucial if we hope to retrieve some of that white working class that felt understandably actually ignored by the Democratic mainline. And, we're either going to go for Bernie or Trump instead. So keeping that skill developing of intersectionality between our multiple issues, look for those really burning points of connection, which are right there, is also, it's a way of building the big alliances that we need, the strong enough alliances that can actually fight back. And all of these human alliances, I have to say, have to be embedded in ecological alliance. Mm-hmm. And the non-human flesh of the world that we are made of, and that we are in a really frightening way violating as a species now. So holding this multiplicity of issues together, instead of seeming, it's just too confusing, I need to only focus. No, it's the way of gathering a new public, a really immense new public. And I think there are signs of that. Like the women's marches were filled with lots of men and people of every color, and there were people carrying their Christian signs, and most people weren't. And there was a humorous togetherness. But I think that intersectionality works hand in hand with the theology of intercarnation.
So we're in the middle of Lent. So if you're thinking intercarnation and the journey through Passion Week to resurrection, what kind of questions kind of drive or come out of you engaging in that narrative?
Well, yeah, the ashes to ashes is always a good place to start. That we are all Adama, we are all dust, clay, and return to it. So getting in touch with our mortality, our compostability, is where we start in Lent, with our very vulnerable finitude. And then that very vulnerable finitude comes to its climax in the remembrance of the crucifixion, which I hope we remember not as the exceptionalist act of God and of his Son, as though this is the one way that the omnipotent Lord could figure out how to save the rest of us, have his beloved Son tortured to death. No, I don't think so. No, but the lure of Jesus' Abba did certainly get him to take great risks, and risks that he finally knew where they were leading. I mean, thousands of Hebrews had already been crucified, and slaves of many ethnicities, rebels against the Roman Empire, and he was making too much trouble, becoming too visible. So I think he had strong flashes of where it was going and tried to prepare his community and himself at Gethsemane for it. So the risks can be dangerous, and the crucifixion honors the cost that was paid by that great risk taker, risking all for love, and the message that there is resurrection is no cheap grace. I go with Shelley Rambo here and want to emphasize the importance of Holy Saturday, which Protestants have mostly lost, that sense of really going into mourning, into grief, into the underworld, of remaining with the loss, remaining with the trauma, whatever it is in your past or in your community, enslavement for a whole community. These traumas we remain with. We don't just get over it. We need to attend, and perhaps regularly, which is why one has a holiday cycle that repeats. We need to attend to the crucifixions and the losses of our history. And in that, this is what Karen Bray calls grave attending. In that grave attending, in that remaining with, it seems like new life is released from the very depths of that suffering, out of the depths of that hell that so many people know so well. So I believe in the power of the resurrection, not as a miraculous exceptionalist zap, but as the grace and life that's at the heart of the creation, and is actually there calling us even now.
One of the things that made me think of is in Crossan's new book on Easter, it goes through, it has tons of pictures because it's looking at the art of the early church, in particular the Eastern church. Wow. And one of the things that drove the whole project was a recognition that in the Eastern church, all the pictures of resurrection are not Jesus, the exception, coming out of the tomb, but Jesus pulling Eve and Adam out of Hades. Ooh. And his hands, the resurrected Christ is always pulling people out. Sometimes there's always Adam and Eve. Sometimes it's dragging everyone with him or whatever. But that the resurrection was already understood in this intercarnational possibilities in the Eastern church.
That's beautiful. And of course, it's just scriptural. I mean, the reflection on the resurrection is always, as Paul begins to systematize, to theologize it, it's always about the anticipation of collective resurrection. It's never about the one exceptional. That one very distinctive experience that no doubt did make appearances of an extremely numinous alternative form to many of his community is telling us something about what's possible for all of us.
And I think the picture is a powerful alternative to the Sistine Chapel, like, will God and Adam even touch type thing. Instead, it's like, no, all that new that's coming into being, you're getting brought into this whole story. You're being seized and pulled forward, and that's it's a divine empowerment and affirmation, and not a, I hope you're ready. Maybe you can get there. If it wasn't for that sneaky snake. So tell us about the new project. So what are we going to be looking forward to in the book that just finished yesterday?
Well, we'll have to have another conversation about that, but very briefly, it's a political theology of the earth, and the subtitle ended up being our planetary emergency and the struggle for a new public. So it has a chapter on the political, and a chapter on the earth, and a chapter on the theology. And it really is trying to name an alternative to the political theology of the exception, which has very interesting old roots and got theorized by a brilliant Nazi, Carl Schmitt. A theory of how all power is the power of the exception, like the power to declare a state of emergency and to decide when there is the exceptional emergency, and then to assert exceptional power, which is what then Hitler did, as though following Schmitt's advice and Schmitt mocked what he called eternal conversation. That's what liberals do, just weak. So I'm very interested in not a weak liberal mediocrity, but a strong alternative to that political theology of the sovereign exception. And I call it the political theology of the messianic inception.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm looking forward to checking it out when it is available. So thank you so much for taking the time to hang out on the internet.
I really love speaking with you, and I have the sense of participating intercarnationally with a whole lot of other invisible and right now to me inaudible presences. So thank you all through you.